Hello, dreamers of all ages, and welcome to Catch Us at the Castle.
Hey everyone, I'm Steph Sweets.
And I'm Ed Pizza. You can catch us at the Castle. There's a lot going on in the world of Disney nowadays. And probably the biggest thing on our minds right now is the fact that the CEO succession is happening sooner than we thought it was going to happen. Bob Iger, who's been around for most of the last 20 years, was scheduled to serve in the CEO role through the end of 2026, but that announcement has come a lot sooner than I think all of us expected. And we have a new CEO. Maybe not a surprise for who the new CEO is, but certainly a new direction, if you will. Josh D'Amaro, who's led the parks for the last handful of years, is the new CEO. But that's not all the news. And while there were a bunch of different rumors about what might happen with another important person inside Disney, Dana Walden, who headed up the cinematic side of Disney, she'll also be occupying a new role not only for her, but for the company. She'll be president, and she'll also be chief creative officer. But before we dig into them in a little bit more detail, a little bit of housekeeping for us, she is Steph Parkside on Instagram. I am at Pizza in Motion on all of those social media channels. We would love it if you gave us a like, thumbs up on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all those places that you're listening. The other things we want to cover today, Steph and I want to dig into a little bit of a question that came up in one of our group chats about whether Disney is a content company or an experiences/theme park company, and the untimely demise of the art bus at Disneyland. A lot to digest. Steph, how are you?
I'm doing great, Ed. It's so great to be back recording with you. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. It's been a hot minute.
It has been. Our schedules have been complicated. I'm sure it was probably more my fault than yours, but having churned through the holidays and gotten back on the road, we also have plenty of content. So just at the top, like we talked about, Josh D'Amaro. I think you and I are both really familiar with Josh. You know, he's a face that's out and about in the parks. I know there are lots of people that have met him. I guess at a high level, are you surprised by the nomination of Josh D'Amaro as the next CEO?
No, I'm not surprised at all. I think that it's something that all of us, as we've watched his career, we were hoping for when Bob came back, that Josh would be the next CEO. We've seen him grow in his current role. We've seen him, especially when he did so much at the last D23 in Anaheim that he did. I think that all bets were pretty much on Josh, that's who we were going to see take the helm. And I'm really excited about it. I am probably one of the only people in all of Disney fandom that doesn't have a picture with Josh. I think everyone was posting all of their pictures with Josh. I do not have a picture of myself with Josh. I guess I need to go in and do an AI generated one, which is what some people were doing too.
Oh, that's great. Yes, I have had the opportunity to meet Josh. You know, I met Bob Iger as well, and I did find Josh to be, not that Bob was aloof, but I found Josh to be very warm and engaging, really listened to the conversations that were happening around him. I thought he was a very dynamic individual. And so I think there's a lot of excitement there. You know, if we're talking about maybe some of the scuttlebutt of why people thought Josh might not be the guy, I think, you know, obviously you have to look at Bob Chapek, who was the CEO prior to Bob Iger coming back. And Chapek's, you know, history with Disney was more park oriented. And, you know, when you look through the history of Disney, which is part of why we want to talk a little bit about this content versus experiences piece, you know, some of the most successful CEOs at Disney are folks that have extensive entertainment experience. And that was Dana Walden's history with Disney, and certainly something that Disney didn't want to lose. She's great at it. And I think, not to belabor what was bad about Chapek, but I think you heard all these stories about stars that he had rough conversations with during COVID, movie releases from really big superstars, and just him handling it poorly. And so I think to some degree there was this question of, is Disney ready to have another person who's park oriented run the parks? That being said, I think Josh D'Amaro's personality, at least from what I can tell, is about as different from Bob Chapek's as it could possibly be.
Yeah, I agree with that. And The fans love him. I mean, everyone, the all in Disney fandom. I have not heard anyone say that they're unhappy, they're displeased, they think it was a bad move. I think that one thing that they learned from the last turnaround is that they've worked hard to prepare us for and tee him up for success, where they didn't do that before. And I know there were some disagreements happening inside Disney even after, the Battle of the Bobs, I guess, is what it was, even after Iger left. And so I think that they've done a really good job of making sure that we understand where the direction is going and that we're all really happy with it, which is really smart of them to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think, it was interesting because I was looking at headlines coming out when the Damaro announcement came out a few days ago, and the headlines all talked about Josh Damaro, but when I read the underlying article, that was when I realized that they also talked about Dana's new role. Look, I mean, I get that the CEO role is going to be the headline for the story. I would argue that the Dana Walden sub-headline is just as important to Disney's future. She came from Fox. She was a CEO of Fox's television group. She spent time in Fox Studios. I think that, I think she's done a lot of great things inside of Disney on the entertainment side of things. And so in this moment to be, potentially feel like she was passed over for the top job and to leave Disney for another top job would certainly hurt Disney, in my opinion. And so pay raise, bonus, title, I'm not sure if that's enough to make her feel welcome. I did read some articles where they actually even talked about making them co-CEOs, which I think is really interesting. I think there's two things here. One of them is, the obvious, she's an incredible talent, and Disney is, largely an entertainment company. At the same time, that's also an experiences company. Again, we're getting that discussion about whether it's content or experiences that drives the ship, but these are both like really big parts of the company. At the same time, selfishly, I'd just say, like, from the standpoint of somebody who has a daughter in college who's trying to figure out what she wants to do, having somebody who's not a white male in the CEO role of a company as visible as Disney is another sign of, hey, telling my daughter she can do anything. So I do like the fact that they tried to establish a role where hopefully she can be, in as many ways as possible, an equal to Josh in running a company that has two really big priorities.
Yeah, and this isn't the first time that we've seen this happen before. It's happened in the past, and some people would argue that those were the most successful days of Disney, is when the role was split before we got Michael Eisner, and that was the height of a lot of Disney new innovative, Beauty and the Beast and all of those great movies that were coming out of the animation, and then also the height of a lot of really innovative things happening in the Disney parks too, before we hit the slump of kind of churn and burn on other rides that are available and plug it into California Adventure. But so I'm really excited that there will be two people running things, and that, that we are seeing a woman at the top too in a very key and important role inside of Disney, that will be very visible. I'm excited about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it came up in our group chat. I think it was Mike who said, Walt and Roy were great co-leaders of the company. I think some folks would also argue that when Eisner was involved, that, Frank Wells was a reasonable accompaniment in that president role. And I think we've, obviously got to see how Josh and Dana work together. I think all indications are they've worked great together in their current roles, their pre-existing roles as of a week ago. But on two very opposite ends of the spectrum, which I think is a really great segue to this question that you and I decided we want to tackle a little bit in this episode, but haven't discussed pre-show. And so I don't 100% know what your opinions are. I have a feeling I know what your opinions are, but there's this question that came up in our group chat. Is Disney a content company, i.e. do the movies drive the company, or are they an experiences company?
It's such a complicated question to answer. So I think, there have been parts of this that you and I have discussed over periods of time. And I think that, looking back in history, they've And if you look at their revenue, like Disney parks drive the revenue as well as the cruises. If you look at underneath of what drives that in history, it hasn't necessarily been the movies driving. And that's what I'm looking at is like the IP. The IP also includes all of the characters within like Mickey Mouse and all of, and I think that
Sure.
you don't have a Disney without that intellectual property. I think you don't have Disney parks without that intellectual property that's brought in. But for me, the question of do you need movies first before you have attractions? I think that it's becoming more and more that way, whether I like it or not. I love Haunted Mansion. It didn't start with intellectual property. Jungle Cruise, there's so many attractions that didn't start with movies. And they've been very successful attractions throughout the years. They have since made movies from it and from those attractions that, whether you love them or hate them, you're neutral, don't care, indifferent. They're there now, but they didn't start out that way. I do think that, looking at Epcot and where we are now as a society, I think that the attractions that they have rethemed and brought in that intellectual property, like Frozen is a good example, are much more popular now than they were when it was just the Norway
Sure.
information, educational. It was the same exact ride track, the same exact ride. The ride did all of the same things except for what you see. The visuals are very different
Yeah.
than what they were back then. And so I think that that ride is much more popular, and that's driven by the IP. So I think that where we were versus where we are and where we're going, I think society probably does demand more of that intellectual property within the parks, meaning the movies moving into the parks more than we used to. I think that immersive experience that Cars Land provides is something that people want to have, people love, and people have become to expect from Disney. That's a very long answer, Ed. Is that what you expected?
I think it's along the lines of what I expected. It's absolutely a complicated question.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, it's funny because I think we would have had a better shot at answering this if something completely unrelated to our discussion had happened, which would have been when J.K. Rowling wandered into the offices of Disney. Disney had realized the potential and had purchased the Harry Potter franchise and woven it into their parks in a way that she found compelling. Because I really do think that's a big part of the revival of Universal. I mean,
100%. Yes.
Horror Nights is definitely a huge part of it as well. But I think Universal also has a lot of franchises that, quite frankly, aren't new. Spider-Man, the Hulk, those sorts of things that have been around for not just years or decades, but generations. And so I think that, we don't really have a great baseline for here's this really successful theme park that isn't based on new stories. And so a little hard to define that. I would say that, and one of the things I argued in the thread was like, I think that I think that Disney has done such a great job creating some of the IP that they're able to make a Cars Land or a Villains Land appear in the Magic Kingdom and Disney World many, many years after, we got to know Radiator Springs and know who Mater and all those other characters were. So I think it speaks to the long-lasting ability of the IP to continue. And certainly, a lot of growth for Marvel on the West Coast and Disneyland, an area they can't grow in Disney World. I still would say, and I think one of the things that really hammered home for me, and a really good podcaster, I would have brought these charts to the table. But the charts that you showed from your recent meeting, that was one of those things where, the revenue that they derive from the theme parks and the cruise ships, and I think it's evidenced by them buying a cruise ship from another company and completely repurposing it so they could shortcut getting another ship out into the water. I think it talks about the absolute importance of experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And experience above all else, I think that having the IP is what helps drive that experience to a different level than what any other company or organization is able to do, really, by having the underlying IP 100%, that if the experience isn't there, then it's not successful. And I think that we've seen that even at other, just like you said, other theme parks and things like that. The experience has to be equal to the IP, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it really does. And I think, this speaks to why, why Dana Walden and Josh D'Amaro are both really, really important figures in whatever comes next for Disney. Whether they both need to have equal sway with the board, or they should both be reporting to someone else, or one should be leading over the other. I mean, I think those are, I don't want to dismiss any of those questions, but I think for Disney to truly be successful, they need someone who's really, really strong on the IP side and creating successful characters, whether that's movies or not. I'll just say, like, maybe I have a little bit of a different view from some of the other folks that we've talked to. I'm not necessarily sure that it has to be successful blockbuster movies. Like, I'm not sure, like, the next successful Marvel film is a through line to increased park revenues. I think the caliber of the experience is a big part of it. And I think, like, the example I would use is, let's talk about, Animal Kingdom versus Avengers Campus Disneyland. Well, I think we would both agree that the Web Slingers is an incredible experience for people. And I think at the same time, you look at Animal Kingdom and you look at Avatar, and Flight of Passage is another incredible experience. Navi River Journey, not as much. And I think that's probably being kind.
That's your personal opinion. I love it.
But would you put it on the same level in terms of attraction for people to come to the parks as Flight of Passage?
No. However, I did go to Animal Kingdom for the first time with my dad. Sorry, not first time. It was the first time that he had been there since Avatar was open.
Yeah.
So he's a huge Avatar fan. I'd never been and experienced that area with somebody that's actually a huge Avatar fan.
Oh, okay.
He loved the boat ride. He loved Flight of Passage. And out of the whole day, out of everything that we experienced, because we hopped to several different parks and did all of the rides he hadn't done before. And Flight of Passage was hands down his favorite ride out of all of the new ones that he rode. And so, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, it's not, Navi River Journey is not on the same level. But there are a lot of people that are not going to also ride Flight of Passage for various reasons that are really happy with Navi River Journey.
For sure. I just think that if you just have IP and you don't build strong rides, you don't build, can't miss experiences. And I would say, like, you don't necessarily even have to be an Avatar fan to feel like you missed something if you didn't get to ride Flight of Passage when you came to Animal Kingdom. And so I think, that from everything I've heard, it sounds like our expansion in Disneyland of Avengers themed add-ons is going to be very dynamic and should be, something that's very attractive to people. And, yes, there's been development of that IP over the past, handful of years with successful movies, but I also think they have to hit on what the experience is. And I think, like, you and I talked about this in an episode recently about the new Monsters Land at Hollywood Studios and, that new ride. And it does seem to be an exciting ride. You'll be, feet hanging down, rolling through the monster warehouse and all that stuff. Like, all that stuff sounds really cool. And if that ride's really successful and they do a great job with it, I mean, I should have looked this up before we started, but, like, when did the Monsters IP come out? It's, it had to be when my kids were babies.
Yeah, my kids were, it's 20 years or more, I think. Like, it's pretty old.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I know I can hear you Googling. Yeah.
2001. So. Yeah. So I think I think it's clear, like, if it's strong IP, I think we believe it'll be a great experience that they build in Hollywood Studios. I think you can build great rides on great IP, even if it hasn't, even if it isn't new IP within the past 5 years.
I totally agree with that, and it'll last and stand the test of time. I think that's why Cars Land opened in 2012. I think that we've got a long time before Cars Land needs to be made over, right? There's
Oh, so
there
great.
so amazing.
So
Yes.
great.
And little kids even still love Cars Land and they love the Cars movies. And so I totally agree with you. What I would want to push more on is I would love to see more innovative new storylines coming out of Disney Animation, Disney Studios, that part of the organization, because it seems like right now we're on and I'm going to use the term again, churn and burn of IP that we've already seen have success. And they're reusing it and expanding the story a little bit because they know that people like it. I would love to see more new things coming out and them just being willing to experiment. I understand in this economic climate, being really careful and more conservative. And also, I would love to see them do some new things. What are your
Yep. No,
thoughts on that?
well, I mean, I think I agree. I don't, when I think about the things that have been hits, I mean, gosh, I mean, do I think that they'd still be making what I would largely regard as successful Toy Story movies this far after the original debut? No. I mean, I also didn't think that for Marvel characters. I mean, I collected comic books when I was a kid, and I'm old. So the fact they've been able to continue to expand on those franchises, I mean, let's be honest, it's hard to create an incredible new franchise. Harry Potter's, got to be one of the most successful, if not the most successful of the past 20 years. I think Encanto is promising, but it doesn't have the same resonance as Toy Story or Monsters or Marvel, for sure. It's a nice add-on, and maybe some companies would be really happy with that, but it almost pales in comparison to some of the titans that Disney has created in my lifetime.
What makes it a franchise? And I'm asking this like philosophically, but also like by definition. Do you know
Yeah.
what makes it a franchise? Is it just multiple movies or having like what makes it a franchise?
My opinion, and I think everybody has their own opinion, I don't necessarily think it revolves around multiple movies, though that is a common theme for things that we regard as franchises. But I think it's just the connection to the characters. And I'll use, a couple that we just talked about for very different reasons. So Marvel is something that, like I said, there's a stack of Spider-Man comic books in my basement, along with The Punisher and Hulk and all the others. But I was a huge Spider-Man fan. And so when my son was old enough to enjoy Spider-Man, that was a character that I was attached to emotionally. And so bringing him to meet Spider-Man or do the Spider-Man ride at Universal, the first time he got to do web slingers, those were all really meaningful to me. And so I think those are what made it a franchise for me. It has that enduring quality. At the same time, I think, when I think about our son and his connection to Mater at a young age, one of the characters that came from Cars, not the main character, but a very, very recognizable character if you know that franchise. And, when our son was 2, and how much he enjoyed riding Radiator Springs at Disneyland, just like the unbridled joy he had for the ride. And now that he's, 15 and still has that same unbridled passion and joy to ride that ride, to me, it sort of crosses over. So there's absolutely the movie component in both of those examples. There are obviously plenty of Marvel movies and plenty of great experiences. And at the same time, with the Cars franchise, you've got these incredible experiences. Mater coming down through Radiator Springs at Disneyland, just as fun as riding the ride, and the movies, and that tie into both. I think just creates that bond that makes it really special for me.
So if I'm hearing you right, it's more of the nostalgia and the emotional connection to the characters, which if that's the definition, then yeah, I think that we have to have that in order to have successful attractions in the parks, because I don't know that we have those same emotional connections to a nostalgia necessarily to some of those things that are also movies. I mean, maybe some people have that same level of nostalgia to the Tiki Room and Haunted Mansion before there were movies and Jungle Cruise and things like that. I don't know. I don't know. Small World. I have a connection to Small World and it's nostalgic for me, but that was because like that was the song that my mom sang to me when I was little and growing up.
Yeah.
So that's for me, that's why there's that nostalgic connection to it. It's really interesting to think about.
Yeah, and I think, when I think about what I consider to be like the most, compelling franchises of our lifetime, it's things like, gosh, I wish I knew the answer to this, but the last Cars movie, I mean, it has to be, if it hasn't been a decade, it's got to be close to a decade since the last Cars movie came out.
Yeah,
Um,
agreed.
and,
I think it's more than a decade for sure.
and Radiator Springs is still a really incredible land. And so I think there are franchises, obviously, that don't revolve around movies, like you talked about, Small World, Haunted House, things like that, Jungle Cruise. But I think the newer things, to your point of having to have that new IP tie-in, I still think we're seeing enduring characters that Disney is creating. And I don't, Radiator Springs doesn't feel tired. I don't think it's going to need a makeover anytime soon.
No, I totally agree. And I just think where our society is and the more social media and the more our little kids are seeing some of these things online is more likely the way that we're going to have to move into that direction of
Yeah.
things in the parks not being visited as much unless there is that connection for those kids to some of the IP first.
No, I definitely think you're onto something there.
Well, thank
Well,
you.
before we run out of time, why don't we talk about something that's going away that won't be a franchise any
Yeah.
longer? Unfortunately, it's going to make things quite a bit harder for people to get around Anaheim.
Yeah. So the art system is going away in Anaheim. Art is the Anaheim Resort Transportation System. It's the buses that would pick people up as you're exiting on Harbor on that right-hand side. A lot of times it would also bring you in from the Toy Story lot, so then you could bypass security. It was really convenient, especially for the resorts that are further away. So if you're more than a mile away, riding the art, or if you have little kids whose feet are really tired at the end of the night, art is very convenient, but they are stopping art. I believe is March 1st is the deadline. Disney's announced that they are looking into other adoptions, other options for people and for guests to be able to get to the parks more easily. I've heard a lot of people say that they've never used it. They don't understand why it's needed, especially when my kids were younger. We were staying a little bit further away to be able to save money. We did rely on art. It was wonderful. I have, even in the past few years, relied on art to be able to get to and from the Disneyland resort. And so I hope that they will figure something out. This is, of course, I've heard a lot of reasons why. I've heard that it's because it's not profitable. I've heard that it's because Disney didn't want to take it over. I've heard that it's because lots of things. Also, there's construction happening right there. Like that
Yeah.
is where when Monsters Inc. closes down and they're working on Avatar, the park will expand into that area and the Avatar attractions will be in that area. So I'm sure that that probably has a lot to do with it too, if that's not the primary reason. But yeah, I hope they'll figure something out for us.
Yeah, I wasn't terribly familiar with art. Like I knew what it was, but when you brought this up as a topic to cover, I did some reading. To your point, I don't know if this is the quote unquote reason, but I learned that art is largely paid for by the hotel occupancy tax in the surrounding area, and that labor cost and bus repair costs and stuff like that had led to a point where they were struggling to cover all the costs. I think the thing that surprises me about that, and I think this lends itself to what you said about, hey, there's probably more than one reason, and let's pull on that thread. I mean, by and large, when I think about hotel occupancy taxes, those are largely borne by people that don't live in the area. They're paid for by people who come for, a once in a lifetime Disneyland trip, or if you're like Steph and I, a once a week trip. But they're
That's an
generally borne by
exaggeration.
quote unquote out of towners. And
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
there's some flexibility with those taxes. And so when I read that, I don't know, it rang a little hollow to me to say, well, we can't take another like 1/4% increase in tax or 0.5% increase in occupancy tax, just because I think that that's a pretty normal way of life for tourism areas. And Disneyland brings so much tourism to all of those hotels, and to say like, well, let's just charge all the guests an extra couple of cents a night is an easy decision to make. Whether it's right or wrong, it's not a hard decision to say, well, let's keep taxing them until they stop coming. And I don't think there are occupancy issues around Disneyland right now with hotels. So I do think there's probably a little bit more to it than just, gosh, we didn't have enough money and we didn't want to raise taxes.
I totally agree. I think it was something that was inevitable anyway, just because of whether it was going to be a temporary shutdown or whatever, because of the construction. I fully expected in the early days, they were talking about how the garage, the new parking garage and the pedestrian bridge, and
Right.
this was over 10 years ago that they were talking about this, how that would be the very first thing that was built. And then everything else would be built. They're doing it different. And I think a lot of that is driven by their desire to keep up with the other parks and their competition in the area, Universal up the road, and just making sure that they've got new things coming in all the time. Universal is competing for the local dollars, and that is the biggest bread and butter for Disney and for Disneyland. And so I think that's probably why the construction order has been changed a little bit. The fact that the bus system in Orlando changed and that free bus service went away, Magical Express, and that people have figured it out gives me hope that we'll figure it out. Mears is back at the airport and you can pay for it now. I'm sure something will come up. I do worry about, people are like, well, more people will just be moved to Lyft. I see a problem with that. A lot of Lyft drivers, it's short rides. It's 2 miles or under.
Right.
And a lot of Lyft drivers don't want to do that. So I see the prices, which are right now anywhere from $8 to $12 to take those rides, going up significantly because there are not going to be an influx of drivers that want to do those rides. And I could also see Disney reconfiguring the drop-off area. It can't hold the drop-off area where it currently is on Harbor cannot accommodate any more Lyft or Uber riders. It just cannot. So
Yeah.
I could see them shifting that. They used to have a pickup place over by the cast member parking Downtown Springs, Disney Springs. What am I even? Not Disney Springs. That's Florida. I'm like on both coasts right now. I just did a coast to coast trip. Hello. So I am on both coasts. Downtown Disney, I could see them reconfiguring that because, right, it's just been an empty parking lot for quite a while. And so it's kind of on the Disneyland hotel side. But making that the primary pickup and drop off, which they probably need to for safety anyway, because that pickup and drop off on Harbor is horrible and not
It's
safe.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy right now. I think you bring up some good points about mirrors. I think, Disneyland is also unique in that if you're not coming into John Wayne Airport, Lyft drivers and Uber drivers can score significantly more expensive rides taking you to the airport. LAX,
Long
I know
Beach even
downtown-
is more expensive
right,
than
Long Beach.
Yeah.
So, from that standpoint, I think you're spot on in terms of people not wanting to do those short runs. So I think there's a lot of pieces to think about there, and I think ultimately there's a need for some sort of a transportation service in between these various, all the various hotels and the theme park. And again, you hit the nail on the head with just how congested and crazy that pickup and drop off lot is for Lyft and Uber vehicles on Harbor. It's not sustainable the way it is now.
No, it's not. So I hope that there will be some solutions besides just shifting more people to Lyft and Uber or walking. Because even that, I can't imagine telling my little kids after a very long day at Disney that now we have to walk a mile and a half or 2 miles to get back to our resort. That would just be unbearable. So
I tried walking back in the summertime to H-Rock, Hyatt Regency Orange County, when the kids were young and asleep in the stroller. And I told my wife it was a good idea. And that was the last time we ever did that.
that was a lie. It was not a good idea.
It was not a good idea. I believed it at the time, but it was one of those like, well, but if we have to wake the kids up and take them out of the stroller, but we were staying so far away and all the things. But yes, I would not. There are so many hotels around Anaheim that I would not recommend walking from the parks to.
Yeah, and for context, Hyatt Regency Orange County is right around 1.5 to 2 miles from Disneyland. So yeah, it just doesn't seem that far, especially when you're already walking 8-10 miles in a day, but it's very far.
My legs remember.
Yes.
All right, well, that
Ed.
seems like a good place to pin it when you and I get together again. Now I think I might have another one to add to my list, but we're going to be talking about mistakes that we've made in the parks. And I did not have walking from Disneyland to H-Rock on my list of mistakes, but
It's 100% on my list. I mean, walking, my kids brought that up. Yeah, walking too far after a long day at Disney. My kids did bring that up. It's on my list.
All right, good. Well, then you'll cover that one because
Yes.
now I realize it was definitely missing from my list.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Please make sure that you share if you like this episode, what content you like best. Share this episode with 3 people, just 3 people that you think will be interested in this content. That will really help us grow a lot more quickly. Thank you for checking in, and we will see you next time. Catch us at the castle.